Hello, I am Mike,
Hello, I am Lily. Welcome to English Podcast Flow.
and today's episode is Learning English is Easy, actually. I've been thinking a lot lately about how so many people I talk to, they view learning English as this like huge, overwhelming challenge.
Yeah.
And it kind of got me wondering if it's really as difficult as we make it out to be.
It's true that a lot of people find the prospect of learning English to be quite daunting, but I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there that contribute to that fear.
Right. And I think sometimes we forget like how much English we're already exposed to every day in our lives, even if we're not actively studying it.
That's a great point. Studies show we're bombarded with English constantly through music, movies, social media, and even advertising, which means we're passively absorbing the language all the time. Think about those catchy pop songs with English lyrics or those international brands that use English slogans. They're everywhere.
Exactly. So it's like our brains are constantly picking up these little bits and pieces of English without us even realizing it. So that gives us a little bit of a head start, right?
Absolutely. It appears that this constant exposure creates a foundation for language learning without any conscious effort. Take, for example, words like taxi, hotel, or internet. They're used globally and are essentially the same in countless languages.
Oh, that's so true. I never thought about it that way. And speaking of things I've ever thought about, I've always wondered, do you really need to have perfect grammar to be fluent in English? Like, do you need to sound like a character from a Jane Austen novel?
That's a common misconception that can really hold people back. Studies show fluency is about effective communication, not grammatical perfection. Even native English speakers make grammatical errors all the time. The key is to get your message across clearly and confidently, even if your grammar isn't flawless.
That's such a relief to hear because honestly, sometimes I get so caught up, trying to remember all the grammar rules
Yeah.
that I like completely lose track of what I'm trying to say.
It's important to remember that language is a tool for communication, and sometimes a simple, grammatically imperfect sentence can be more effective than a perfectly constructed one. For example, if you're at a restaurant and you want to order a drink, you could say, "I want water, please," instead of, "May I please have a glass of water?" Both are correct, but the first one is more direct and natural in that situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like sometimes it's better to just go with the flow and not overthink it.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about simplicity, um, it occurs to me that English actually has a lot of easy words, especially for beginners.
Absolutely. It appears that English has borrowed words from so many other languages over the centuries that it's full of cognates, words that share a common root and have similar meanings across different languages. Words like information, communication, and technology are practically universal at this point.
Right. And even beyond those super common words, English often uses, shorter words and simpler sentence structures than other languages. I remember when I was first learning Spanish, I was amazed at how long some of the sentences were.
That's a good observation. English tends to be more concise and to the point, which can make it easier to grasp the meaning, especially for beginners. Think about a phrase like, "I am going to the store." You could express that same idea in a more complex way, but the simple structure is clear and effective.
Okay, so it sounds like we've kind of established that perfect grammar isn't a must-have and there are tons of easy words to get you started. But what about like actually learning the language? Does it have to be all textbooks and flashcards all the time?
Not at all. In fact, there are countless ways to learn English passively without even feeling like you're studying. Think about all the movies and TV shows you watch, the music you listen to, and the social media you scroll through. All of that can be a valuable language learning material.
That's a really good point. I remember when I was learning French, I would watch French movies with subtitles all the time. Like I didn't even realize I was learning at first. But then, as I continued watching, I started noticing I was picking up new words and phrases without even trying.
Exactly. It appears that your brain is constantly making connections and absorbing information, even when you're not consciously aware of it. So the more you expose yourself to authentic English content, the more your brain gets familiar with the sounds, rhythms, and structures of the language.
So in a way, just by like watching our favorite Netflix shows or listening to music, we're kind of setting ourselves up for success in learning English.
Absolutely. And the more enjoyable you make that process, the more likely you are to stick with it. So find those activities that you genuinely enjoy, whether it's listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos, and just immerse yourself in the language.
Okay, so we've talked about passive learning, but like at some point you have to actually start speaking English, right?
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that's like the scariest part. I mean, the fear of making mistakes in front of others can be absolutely paralyzing.
You're absolutely right. Studies show one of the biggest obstacles for language learners is overcoming the fear of speaking. But here's the thing. Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process. In fact, they're essential. Every time you make a mistake, you have an opportunity to learn and improve.
I know you're right, but it's still so hard to shake that feeling of self-consciousness when you're, trying to speak a new language. It's like you're constantly worried about sounding silly or being judged.
It's all about shifting your perspective. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, try to view them as stepping stones. Think of it this way. Every time you stumble over a word or mispronounce something, you're actually getting closer to fluency. You're identifying areas where you need to improve, and that's valuable information.
Hmm. That's an interesting way to look at it. So it's not about trying to avoid mistakes altogether. It's about learning from them and using them to your advantage. But how do you actually start speaking if you're terrified?
Start small. You don't have to jump into a conversation with a native speaker right away. Try talking to yourself in English throughout the day. It might feel silly at first, but it's a great way to build confidence and get comfortable with the sounds of the language. Narrate your actions, describe what you see around you, even have imaginary conversations in your head. The key is to just get those words flowing.
Okay, I like that. It's like creating a safe space for yourself to practice without any pressure or judgment. And you know what? Now that we're talking about practicing, I think it's important to remember that you probably already know more English than you realize.
That's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in feeling like you're starting from scratch, but the reality is we've all been exposed to so much English throughout our lives. Think about all the international words that have become part of our global vocabulary words like pizza, internet, and chocolate. You already know these words.
You're absolutely right. And those words are just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many English words and phrases that we use on a daily basis without even thinking about it, especially in the context of technology, music, and social media. So we're not starting from zero. We're building on a foundation that already exists.
Exactly. It appears that you already have a head start. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of recognizing that existing knowledge and using it as a springboard for further learning.
So how can we actually tap into that existing knowledge and make it work for us? It's one thing to passively absorb English, but it's another to actively use it.
That's where things get really interesting. There are so many techniques and strategies you can use to bridge the gap between passive exposure and active fluency.
And I bet you have some amazing tips to share with us. What are some of the most effective ways to turn those random encounters with English into a solid foundation for fluency?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is to just kind of shift your mindset. Like instead of viewing English as something foreign or intimidating, try to embrace it as something that's already a part of your life.
Okay, I like that idea. It's like reframing the way you think about English. But how do you actually put that into practice?
It's all about being more mindful of those everyday interactions with English. For example, if you're scrolling through social media and come across a post in English, don't just skim over it. Take a moment to actually read it. Pay attention to the vocabulary, the grammar, and the overall message.
That's a good point. It's like turning those mindless scrolling sessions into like mini English lessons.
Exactly. And you can do the same thing with videos. If you're watching a YouTube video or a Netflix show, turn on the English subtitles. Even if you don't understand every single word, you'll start to pick up on patterns and familiarize yourself with the sounds of the language.
So it's about actively engaging with English, even those moments when you're just like relaxing or having fun.
Precisely. And the more you do that, the more natural and effortless it will become.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this mindset shift can really make a difference. It's about making English a part of your daily life, not just something you study in isolation.
Exactly. And speaking of making English a part of your daily life, another powerful strategy is to surround yourself with the language as much as possible.
That makes perfect sense. But for those of us who don't live in an English-speaking country, how can we create that kind of immersive environment?
Well, there are actually a lot of creative ways to do this. One simple strategy is to change the language settings on all your devices to English. So your phone, your computer, your tablet, everything would be in English.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be a bit overwhelming at first.
It might be a little strange initially, but you'd be surprised how quickly you adapt. Plus, it's an incredibly effective way to constantly expose yourself to English vocabulary and grammar.
It's like having a little English cooter whispering in your ear all day long.
Exactly. And it's not just about the words themselves. It's about getting used to the rhythm and flow of the language, seeing how sentences are structured and how words are used in different contexts.
That's a great point. We often underestimate the importance of like immersing ourselves in the sounds of the language. It's like training your ear to recognize the nuances and patterns of English.
Absolutely. Now, another incredibly valuable way to create that immersive environment is to seek out opportunities to listen to and interact with native English speakers.
I completely agree, but not everyone has access to English-speaking friends or colleagues. So how can people who don't have those connections find opportunities to practice?
Well, thankfully, we live in a digital age where connecting with people from all over the world is easier than ever. There are so many online language exchange platforms and communities where you can connect with native English speakers who are eager to practice their language skills with you.
That's such a fantastic resource. It's a win-win situation. You get to practice your English, and they get to practice their native language.
Exactly. And the beauty of these platforms is that you can often find people who share your interests. So the conversations are more natural and engaging. It's like having a virtual language partner who's invested in your learning journey.
It's amazing how technology has opened up so many possibilities for language learning. Speaking of challenges, I think one of the biggest hurdles for many English learners is overcoming the fear of sounding silly or making mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very common fear. And it's completely understandable. No one wants to feel foolish or judged, especially when they're trying to communicate in a new language.
Exactly. It's like that feeling of vulnerability holds people back from speaking up and practicing. But how can we overcome that fear and embrace the imperfections that are an inevitable part of language learning?
Well, first of all, it's crucial to remember that everyone makes mistakes. It's a natural part of the learning process. Even native English speakers stumble over their words from time to time.
That's so true. We've all been there. Those moments when our brains just can't seem to find the right words. But it's important to remember that those moments are not failures. They're simply opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. And the more you allow yourself to make mistakes, the faster you'll learn. It's like taking those stumbles and turning them into stepping stones.
I love that analogy. It's about shifting our perspective and seeing mistakes as valuable feedback instead of something to be ashamed of.
Precisely. Now, another helpful tip for overcoming the fear of speaking is to record yourself speaking English.
I have to admit that sounds a bit intimidating.
It can be at first, but it's incredibly helpful for identifying areas where you need to improve. It's like having an objective ear listening in and providing feedback.
So you would record yourself maybe reading a passage or having a conversation with yourself in English?
Exactly. And then you listen back to the recording, paying attention to your pronunciation, your intonation, and the fluency of your speech. You might be surprised by what you hear.
It's like gaining a new awareness of your own speaking habits.
Precisely. And once you've identified areas where you need to improve, you can focus your practice on those specific areas.
I can see how that would be incredibly valuable. It's about taking a proactive approach to language learning and using feedback to guide your progress.
And, of course, it's essential to celebrate those small victories along the way. Every milestone, no matter how small, deserves to be acknowledged.
I couldn't agree more. Those little wins can provide a huge boost of motivation and keep you moving forward on your language learning journey.
Exactly. So whether you've mastered a new grammar rule, successfully held a conversation in English, or simply felt more confident speaking up in class, take a moment to appreciate your progress.
It's all about recognizing those moments of growth and using them as fuel to keep going.
And remember, learning English is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a journey that requires patience, persistence, and a genuine love for the language.
And the rewards are immeasurable.
Absolutely. Being able to communicate effectively in English opens up a world of possibilities. It allows you to connect with people from different cultures, explore new ideas, and expand your horizons.
It's like unlocking a whole new dimension of human experience.
So embrace the challenge, enjoy the process, and never stop learning.
Those are words to live by. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another important aspect of language learning, expanding your vocabulary.
Ah, yes, vocabulary, the building blocks of communication.
It's true. You can't express yourself effectively if you don't have the words to do so.
But memorizing endless lists of words can be tedious and ineffective.
So what's a better approach to vocabulary acquisition?
It's all about learning new words in context.
Meaning you encounter them naturally in real-life situations.
Exactly. For example, if you're reading an article about technology and come across the word algorithm, you'll understand its meaning based on the surrounding sentences.
It's like piecing together a puzzle. The context provides the clues you need to understand the meaning of the word.
Precisely. And this approach is much more effective than simply memorizing definitions from a dictionary.
Because it helps you internalize the meaning and use the word correctly in different situations.
Exactly. Now, another powerful technique for expanding your vocabulary is to use flashcards.
Flashcards. Those little cards with words on one side and definitions on the other.
Yes, but there's a strategic way to use them that can make all the difference.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Instead of simply flipping through the cards, aimlessly try using a spaced repetition system.
What's that?
It's a technique that involves reviewing flashcards at increasing intervals based on your memory strength.
So the idea is to review words just before you're about to forget them.
Exactly. This helps reinforce the information in your long-term memory.
That sounds like a smart approach. It's all about optimizing the learning process.
And there are many apps and websites that can help you implement spaced repetitions seamlessly.
Technology can be a powerful tool for language learning.
Absolutely. It can provide personalized feedback, track your progress, and even connect you with other learners.
So it's about embracing those resources and making them work for you.
Exactly. Now, speaking of technology, let's talk about another valuable resource for language learners: online dictionaries.
Online dictionaries. They are like a treasure trove of information.
They go far beyond simple definitions.
So what else can you find in an online dictionary?
Well, for starters, you can often listen to the pronunciation of a word.
That's incredibly helpful for improving your accent.
Absolutely. And many dictionaries also provide example sentences which show you how the word is used in context.
That's so valuable for understanding the nuances of a word.
And some dictionaries even offer synonyms and antonyms, which can help you expand your vocabulary further.
It's like having a personal language tutor at your fingertips.
Exactly. So make online dictionaries your best friend.
Now let's move on to another crucial aspect of language learning: grammar.
Grammar, the framework that holds language together.
It can be a daunting topic for many learners.
It's true. But understanding grammar is essential for constructing clear and accurate sentences.
But how can we approach grammar in a way that's engaging and effective?
Well, instead of memorizing endless rules, try to understand the underlying logic behind them.
So it's about seeing the patterns and principles that govern language.
Exactly. And one way to do this is to break down complex grammar concepts into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So, for example, instead of tackling the entire tense system at once, you might focus on the present simple tense first.
Precisely. And as you master each chunk, you can gradually build upon your knowledge.
It's like building a house brick by brick.
Exactly. And another helpful strategy is to practice grammar in context.
Meaning you use it actively in real-life situations.
Exactly. For example, instead of simply doing grammar exercises in a workbook, try writing emails in English or having conversations with native speakers.
That way you're not just learning the rules, you're actually applying them.
And that's when the magic happens.
It's when grammar becomes a tool for communication rather than a set of abstract concepts.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from them.
Mistakes are our teachers in disguise.
Now let's talk about another essential skill for language learners: pronunciation.
Pronunciation. The way we articulate sounds and words.
It plays a crucial role in effective communication.
After all, if people can't understand what you're saying, it doesn't matter how good your grammar or vocabulary is.
Exactly. So how can we improve our pronunciation?
Well, one helpful technique is to pay attention to the sounds of the English language.
Meaning listening carefully to how native speakers pronounce words.
Exactly. And you can do this by watching movies, listening to music, or even just having conversations with English speakers.
And as you listen, pay attention to the rhythm, the intonation, and the stress patterns.
Those elements are just as important as the individual sounds themselves.
Absolutely. They convey meaning and emotion.
Another helpful tip is to practice mimicking the sounds you hear.
Meaning trying to reproduce them as accurately as possible.
Exactly. And you can do this by repeating words and phrases out loud.
And don't be afraid to exaggerate the sounds at first.
It's like training your mouth to move in new ways.
And as you practice, your pronunciation will gradually become more natural and effortless.
You know, something else that can help with pronunciation is to pay attention to your tongue and lip movement.
That's a great point. The position of your tongue and lips can dramatically affect the sounds you produce.
And there are resources available that can guide you on the correct placement for specific sounds.
Exactly. You can find videos, diagrams, and even interactive tools online.
Technology can be a valuable asset in this area.
Absolutely. Now, another helpful technique is to record yourself speaking English and then listen back to the recording.
We talked about this earlier in the context of grammar, but it's equally valuable for pronunciation.
Exactly. When you listen back to the recording, you can identify areas where your pronunciation needs improvement.
And you can also compare your pronunciation to that of native speakers.
It's like having a personal pronunciation coach.
Now let's move on to another important aspect of language learning, fluency.
Fluency, the ability to speak or write smoothly and effortlessly.
It's the ultimate goal for many language learners.
But achieving fluency takes time and practice.
So what are some strategies we can use to improve our fluency?
Well, one key is to focus on speaking as much as possible.
Meaning engaging in conversations, practicing speeches, or even just talking to yourself.
Exactly. The more you speak, the more comfortable and fluent you'll become.
It's like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
And another helpful tip is to think in English.
We touched on this earlier, but it's worth reiterating.
Instead of translating from your native language, try to form thoughts directly in English.
This will help you speak more naturally and spontaneously.
And it will also reduce the mental strain of constant translation.
Now, another valuable technique for improving fluency is shadowing.
Shadowing, what's that?
It involves listening to a recording of a native English speaker and then repeating what you hear as closely as possible.
So it's like mimicking their pronunciation, their intonation, and their rhythm.
Exactly. It's a powerful way to internalize the sounds and patterns of the language.
And it can also help you improve your listening comprehension.
Because you're forced to pay close attention to the details of the speech.
Now, another effective strategy for improving fluency is to read aloud.
Read aloud. Why is that helpful?
Well, it forces you to pronounce words correctly and to pay attention to the flow of the language.
Like a mini speaking practice session.
Exactly. And you can read anything you enjoy, articles, stories, even emails.
The key is to choose materials that are engaging and at your level.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, confidence.
Confidence. The belief in your ability to succeed.
It's essential for any language learner.
Without confidence, it's easy to feel discouraged and give up.
So how can we build our confidence in English?
Well, one important step is to set realistic goals.
Don't try to learn everything at once.
Start with small, manageable goals and gradually work your way up.
And celebrate your achievements along the way.
Those little wins can provide a huge boost of motivation.
Another helpful tip is to focus on your strengths.
Instead of dwelling on your weaknesses.
Exactly. Identify the areas where you excel.
This will help you feel more capable and confident.
And it will also remind you of the progress you've already made.
Now, another important strategy for building confidence is to surround yourself with supportive people.
Meaning friends, family, or fellow language learners who encourage and believe in you.
Those people can provide invaluable emotional support and motivation.
And they can also help you celebrate your successes and overcome your challenges.
So seek out those positive influences in your life.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, motivation.
Motivation. The driving force behind our actions.
It's what keeps us going when things get tough.
But staying motivated can be a challenge, especially when it comes to language learning.
So how can we maintain our motivation over the long haul?
Well, one helpful strategy is to remind yourself of your reasons for learning English.
Why did you embark on this journey in the first place?
What are your goals?
Those reasons will provide a sense of purpose and direction.
And they will help you stay focused when you feel like giving up.
Another helpful tip is to make language learning enjoyable.
Find activities that you genuinely enjoy.
Whether it's watching movies, listening to music, or connecting with other learners.
The more you enjoy the process, the more motivated you'll be.
And another effective strategy is to set rewards for yourself.
When you reach a milestone,
treat yourself to something special.
This will give you something to look forward to and make the journey more rewarding.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, consistency.
Consistency. The key to success in any endeavor.
It's especially crucial for language learning.
Because language is a skill that requires regular practice.
So how can we maintain consistency in our language learning routine? Well, one helpful strategy is to schedule dedicated time for language study. Treat it like an important appointment.
And stick to your schedule as much as possible.
Another helpful tip is to break down your study sessions into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Instead of trying to cram everything into one long session.
Right, spread it out throughout the day.
This will make the task feel less daunting and more achievable.
And it will also help you retain information better.
Now, another effective strategy for maintaining consistency is to find a study buddy.
Someone who can hold you accountable and provide support.
Exactly. Having a partner in crime can make the journey more enjoyable and less lonely.
And it can also help you stay motivated.
Let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, patience.
Patience. The ability to wait calmly without getting frustrated.
It's an essential virtue for language learners.
Because learning a new language takes time and effort.
There will be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt.
But it's important to remember that progress is not always linear.
There will be periods of rapid growth and periods of plateau.
But as long as you keep practicing and stay persistent, you will eventually reach your goals.
So be kind to yourself, embrace the journey, and celebrate every step forward.
Now let's move on to another important aspect of language learning, embracing mistakes.
Mistakes. They're an inevitable part of the learning process.
They're not something to be ashamed of.
In fact, they're valuable opportunities for growth.
So how can we embrace mistakes and learn from them? Well, first of all, it's important to change our mindset about mistakes.
Instead of viewing them as failures,
Right. We need to see them as feedback.
they tell us what we need to work on.
And they help us identify areas where we need to improve.
Another helpful tip is to analyze our mistakes
Figure out why we made the mistake.
and how we can avoid making it again.
Exactly. This process of reflection can be incredibly valuable for our learning. And finally, it's important to remember that everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers.
Even native speakers. So don't be afraid to experiment.
Try new things.
And don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, seeking feedback.
Feedback is essential for improvement.
It helps us identify our strengths and weaknesses.
And it provides guidance on how we can improve.
So how can we seek feedback on our English?
Well, one obvious way is to ask a teacher or a tutor.
They can provide expert guidance and personalized feedback.
But feedback doesn't always have to come from a professional.
We can also ask friends, family, or fellow language learners for their input.
And there are many online platforms where you can get feedback from native speakers.
For example, you can submit writing samples or recordings of your speech for evaluation
The key is to be open to feedback.
and to use it as a tool for growth.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of language learning, setting realistic expectations.
It's important to have ambitious goals.
But it's equally important to be realistic.
Learning a new language takes time and effort,
It's not something that happens overnight.
so don't get discouraged if you don't see results immediately,
Be patient with yourself.
and celebrate your progress along the way.
Remember, every step forward is a victory.
You know, when we talk about immersing ourselves in English culture, we often think about, traveling to English-speaking countries, which is an incredible experience, but it's not always feasible for everyone.
That's true. But thankfully, there are so many ways to experience English culture right from the comfort of your own home.
Exactly. So let's dive into some of those options and explore how we can bring English culture into our daily lives.
Well, one of the most accessible and enjoyable ways is through movies and TV shows. It appears that they provide a window into different English-speaking cultures, showcasing their customs, traditions, and values.
Yeah, it's like taking a virtual trip to another country. You can hear the different accents, observe the social interactions, and get a feel for the overall vibe of the place.
Precisely. And the beauty of streaming services is that you have access to a vast library of content from all over the world. You can watch British comedies, Australian dramas, American sitcoms, and so much more.
It's like having a passport to different English-speaking worlds all at your fingertips. And speaking of entertainment, music is another fantastic way to immerse yourself in English culture.
Studies show music has a unique power to connect people across borders and languages. It evokes emotions, tells stories, and reflects the values and experiences of the artists who create it.
I completely agree. I've always found that listening to music in English helps me connect with the language on a deeper level. It's like the melodies and the rhythms create a bridge between my own culture and the English-speaking world.
Absolutely. And there's such a diverse range of English language music to explore, from classic rock and pop to hip-hop country and everything in between.
It's like a musical buffet with something to suit every taste. Now, beyond movies and music, reading is another powerful way to delve into English culture.
It appears that books and articles offer a more in-depth perspective on culture, allowing you to explore different perspectives, historical events, social issues, and literary traditions.
And the beauty of reading is that you can do it at your own pace. Pausing to reflect on the text, look up unfamiliar words, or simply savor the beauty of the language.
Precisely. And there's a wealth of English language literature to choose from. From classic novels to contemporary fiction, from biographies and memoirs to thought-provoking essays.
It's like having a library of knowledge and experiences at your disposal. Now, in this digital age, we also have the incredible opportunity to connect with English speakers online.
Studies show social media forums, language exchange platforms, and online communities offer a fantastic way to interact with people from all over the world who speak English.
It's like creating a virtual network of English-speaking friends and acquaintances who can share their perspectives, experiences, and insights with you.
Exactly. And these online interactions can be incredibly enriching. They expose you to different accents, slang expressions, and cultural perspectives that you might not encounter otherwise.
It's like expanding your understanding of the vast and diverse world of English-speaking cultures. So whether it's through movies, music reading, or online interactions, there are countless ways to immerse yourself in English culture without even leaving your home.
And the more you immerse yourself, the more you'll appreciate the richness and beauty of the language and the people who speak it.
Absolutely. Well said. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today for this fascinating exploration of English language learning.
It's been my pleasure, and I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. The journey of learning English is a beautiful and rewarding one. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and never lose sight of the incredible opportunities that await you.
That's perfect advice. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to English Podcast Flow. We'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.